Hey, hi, it's Rob Tercek. And this week on the Futurists, I'm going to show you an interview I did just before I went to Dubai for our Futurist Summit, which just completed. And so this interview was done just before we went there. I was interested in speaking to someone who had a positive take on how we can apply artificial intelligence at scale to transform entire businesses, entire industries. Often when we think about AI, we think about it on the personal level, like how does it affect me or my job or my future? How can I use it to advance my career? Or we think about it on kind of this global level. Will AI take all the jobs? Will it somehow take over the world? And so on. Some of those are doomer scenarios. I was interested in finding someone who could speak to the topic of artificial intelligence and machine learning in a more constructive way. How can we apply it at scale to transform industries? And that's why I reached out to today's speaker. Today's speaker is Sangeet Paul Choudary, and he is an expert in the platform economy, and he's just written a great new book about how to apply AI to redesign and reorganize entire markets. It's called The Reshuffle. And here's the interview. For a number of years, I've been following this author on Substack, where he posts very thoughtful pieces, not just about business strategy, but about how technology will reshape the way we think about business strategy and the way we implement it. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce to the futurists and to our audience Sangeet Paul Choudary, the author of a new book called The Reshuffle. Sangeet, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Futurists.
Thank you, Robert. So good to be here.
I'm excited to have you on the show. I've been reading with great interest as I got aware that you were writing yet another book. I thought, oh, this could be quite relevant because we hear about AI frequently on this show. Since it's about the future, it seems like just about every speaker we talk to has an opinion.
Mhm.
And sometimes when they bring opinions that are too optimistic or too pessimistic, I'm skeptical about that. I feel like it's kind of my responsibility when I'm interviewing people to probe around those assumptions to find out what those assumptions are based on. And I get satisfied by some answers, and other answers leave me questioning further those big assumptions. I think there's two groups that I've heard from on the show. One group is hyper optimistic about AI, and this is the abundance crowd that tells us that the AI is going to automate everything and no one will have to work. And somehow we have this kind of just around the corner general intelligence, and that will be smarter than humans, and somehow that's going to work out great. That's one perspective that we hear. I think a little bit of skepticism is warranted when we hear that perspective. But there's an opposite view as well. The opposite view is the doomer view. And that doomer view encompasses things like, oh, AI is going to replace us. It's going to steal my job. It's going to degrade employment. It's going to degrade labor and make it hard for people to get wages paid or properly paid. And then there's, of course, an even scarier doomer view, which is that general intelligence is somehow going to wipe out humanity and kill us all. And while I know you don't really comment on that extreme perspective, I want to start today by getting your perspective on the middle of these two things. You know, you've written several times now that both of those polarized views are not that helpful as a frame to understand the impact of AI. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this conversation does get very polarized in the sense that you have these two groups, and very often they're characterized by, you know, one side thinking in a zero-sum way and thinking about a fixed pie that's going to be reshared between machines and humans, and the other side talking about a positive sum future. And uh, in a way, that the optimistic side actually looks down on the pessimistic side, saying that it's not going to be zero sum, the pie is going to grow much larger. But what the optimistic side also misses is that there are arguments on the pessimistic side that make sense. um,
Hmm.
and that's because even though the pie increases, the pie grows larger with every technological advancement. We've seen output and productivity increase, and so the pie does grow larger. But what we've also seen, and what we're likely to see even more so with AI, is that even when the pie expands, it does not necessarily get distributed equally or in proportion to how it is today. What both these groups miss is that, even whether they think about it in terms of zero sum or positive sum, they are not thinking about the fact that the entire system is about to change because of technology. It's not, uh, you're not just taking the same old system, increasing output within that, increasing demand for labor, and then distributing that between machines and humans. You're actually rethinking what output should be, what new value should look like, and accordingly how should it be organized. I take many examples in the book about how this has happened in the past, and I especially, when writing the book, I specifically wanted to look for technologies that we would consider dumb, because artificial intelligence, we were obsessed with benchmarks. We're obsessed with, what's GPT-5 doing better than GPT-4 and so on. And we're completely obsessed with looking at what benchmarks the technology hits. What we often fail to realize is that the dumbest of technologies have massive second and third order effects, because of which they change winners and losers in very big ways. I'm happy to go into some examples over here, but the two technologies that I felt were most fascinating, one, the shipping container, and two, the barcode, both of which are very dumb technologies, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, the impact that they've had on the world has been dramatic.
It's true. You write about that eloquently in the beginning of the book, in the Reshuffle, and I resonate with that topic because I'm a supply chain geek,
Mhm.
and I've worked with the barcode standards body in the past, so I have some experience with that. And I too, like you, am impressed by the combined impact of the container, the shipping container, and the barcode. The two together, one's an information system, and the other one is a way to organize physical goods. But it's the two together that creates that great power. Before we jump into those examples, I want you to introduce yourself a little bit. So tell our audience, what is it that you do? You're the author of a couple of other books. Platform Revolution is one I've read, I've enjoyed. You write a Substack, but you also are an advisor to companies. So tell us a little bit about what you do and how that helps companies make better decisions about the future.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I do is, and this is an arc that's traced across both the books that you mentioned, Platform Revolution and Reshuffle. Um, an underlying theme of the work that I do is essentially looking at where value is shifting, where the new value is, because of new technologies coming in. And when I wrote Platform Revolution, the dominant mental model that we had about digital was that digital was a new channel, it was a new way to deliver. We were going from software to SaaS, we were going from physical media to online media. But my argument was that digital was fundamentally a new way to reorganize markets. And when you reorganize markets, you actually start toying with the very basis of free market theory. You start relying not just on price signals, you start actually owning the rules of market making. And that's what, Airbnb, Uber, and other companies have done over the past decade or so. And what I've done with my new work on AI is also, again, very similar. I reframe the conversation from AI is just a better way to get tasks done faster, cheaper, better, to saying that AI is a way to reimagine what business you are in, what you are as a company, which industries you play in, and what the rules of competition are. So my advisory work typically ends up focusing on these issues. It looks at taking away staid ways of thinking about putting new technologies into old frames of thinking, and really thinking about how does the definition of value, the rules of competition, your business models change when new technologies come in.
Great. This is super stuff because this topic of value control in the digital domain is a lively discussion, but it's somewhat abstract for people who are outside it. So maybe we should talk a little bit about what you actually mean. Maybe we can start with the platform economy because I think, for instance, everybody has a smartphone now. So everybody listening to the show has a smartphone. And they might not realize that there's a very elaborate economy behind that smartphone. Digital goods and services are developed and produced and delivered through that phone, but value control is dominated by one company. No matter which phone you have, there's one company that decides what happens inside of that marketplace. And in a way, that's similar to the way a company like Walmart can operate, where Walmart, most Americans, I think 90% of Americans visit Walmart at least once a month. So we have a store that commands the attention and the dollars of a lot of American consumers. What people I think don't realize when they're shopping in that store is that Walmart dominates its suppliers and it can
That's right.
dictate the pricing model. It can dictate how much profit a company gets. Is this what you envision happening with artificial intelligence as well?
Yeah, I think one of the common themes that we've seen, whether it was the way Walmart leveraged its investments in, satellite and information technology of its time and the adoption of barcodes, or whether it's how Amazon has used, the rise of digital technologies to create a platform. Um, what we see with all these examples is that whenever there's a technological shift, whether it's the barcode or to your point, there's been a confluence of three shifts in particular in the early 2010s that have landed as the platform economy. The first, as you mentioned, was the smartphone. The second was just dramatic improvement in our ability to process data, and that also the need to process that data came up because of the dramatic rise of the social web, the fact that we were able to create so much data because anybody could now create data. And so the ability to extract data at scale and process it and centralize its benefits moved a lot of the benefits to a few players who could do it at scale and who could organize users around themselves who were constantly producing that data. So whether you think of Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Google, all these examples, they're all fundamentally uh, built around this idea of the platform economy, where you organize large scale markets of producers and consumers working together, creating and exchanging value, and um, y- your ability to aggregate these large markets and to learn from these markets and to capture data at scale enables you to gain outside influence as a gatekeeper, as an intermediary in these markets. And so that's really what played out with the platform economy. As I mentioned, smartphone, the ability to process data, and more recently, everything moving to the cloud and hyper specialization of cloud-based services. All of these things led us to the platform economy. And to your point about, decoupling value creation from value capture, I think that is best illustrated in the platform economy because a lot of the value creation still sits with assets of production. So if you're a driver on Uber, you're taking up all of the risk associated with value creation, whereas most of the returns of creating that value accrues to the platform because the platform creates the condition, the conditions through which the two sides of the market, the demand and the supply side, come together over time by establishing network effects where more suppliers and more buyers converge onto the same platform. It eliminates competitors, and through that, it gets greater power over setting the rules of that market. And so that's where we've really seen this decoupling of value creation and value capture, and that's something that I expect accelerates with AI because AI actually allows this large scale orchestration, not just of highly structured information, as we see with today's platforms, but it allows it with unstructured information, with information that's traditionally been tacit knowledge, um, that's traditionally been with highly trained humans, when a lot of that can be now easily accessible through models, and when those models can constantly learn from large scale usage, a lot of the advantage associated with both execution and learning of those specific skills now accrue to a few players who can bring those models together. So I see, increasing concentration and decoupling of value creation versus value capture happening with AI as well.
Okay, that was a sweeping answer that contained a lot of information. Let me try to unpack a few key concepts for our listeners. So a moment ago, we talked about the example of the container and the barcode. And if our listeners read Paul's book, Sangeet's book, you'll find that inside that book, in the beginning, he talks very much in detail about how coordination of containers ended up becoming the most valuable part of that new ecosystem. So the container itself, changed the way we shipped goods, actually increased the volume because it became so efficient. You could now manufacture in other places. Manufacturers got some advantage from that, but the real gains went to the organizations that could coordinate that kind of trade on a global level. So what I take away from that is something similar to the example you gave, referring to Uber or Airbnb. Here we have individual people who've invested in an asset, a car or a home, and they'd like to make a little bit of extra income if they can. But there's no easy way for them to do that. You can't take out an ad and offer your own car as a service. So there's a need for someone to organize that market. And it turns out that around the world, there are drivers all over the world that would be ready and willing to pick up a passenger in their own personal car if there was just some easy way to connect with that customer. So in this example, the smartphone is the mechanism that the consumer carries around that allows them to order anything they want on demand. And that enables a company like Airbnb for homes or Uber for travel or car transport to aggregate that demand. And once they aggregate that demand, all the people who own those assets, whether they're homes or cars, they come forth, they sign up for the service. And this seems to have worked very, very well in both examples, whether it's an organization like Walmart that orchestrates global supply chain, or a country like Singapore that organizes global trade of containers, or in the digital or the mobile environment, online marketplaces like Airbnb and Uber that organize individuals that own an asset that want to get a little bit of value from those assets and match them together. In all of these examples, what we're seeing is that on one side, they're aggregating demand. They're figuring out where's the demand for this new thing that has been enabled. And then on the other side, they're organizing supply. Now, in most of the examples I just gave you, what's necessary is some sort of standard or some sort of contract, or sometimes both, where all parties say, yeah, I agree to these terms. I accept these terms. I agree to use a 20-foot equivalent container unit that is standardized so it can fit on a truck or it can fit on a crane or something like that. And organizing an entire industry and organizing standards is a mighty slow process. Trust me, I've worked on it myself in my career. It takes years of effort and it doesn't always work. It's very hard to get everybody in an entire industry to agree on anything, let alone a standard. So that can take some time. One of the points that you make in the reshuffle is that AI might change this in a rather dramatic way. And this is quite interesting to me. Instead of trying to set industry standards or trying to set data standards so that everybody complies, or creating APIs that people have to comply to, or on the other side, having terms of use or service agreements with end users, instead, companies can simply use AI, particularly generative AI, to survey the entire marketplace, everything that's on the web and maybe sometimes off the web if there's sensor networks. And they can reorganize markets in ways that might not require a standard or some sort of opt-in agreement. Did I get it right, Sangeet? If I didn't, please help me understand it, because I think this is a big unlock for anyone who's thinking about AI in a systems way.
Yeah, you actually you nailed it in terms of the key difference that I believe AI brings to how ecosystems are coordinated. In the past, you either needed standards or you had these really unique moments of technological shifts where a single player could organize a really large market because of a technological shift. So, Google figuring out how to organize the world's information just as the internet was exploding, or Facebook doing that as we moved from a web of documents to a network of people. Those are relatively their technological moments, but in general, it was one of these two things. Now, what AI enables us to do is it enables us to coordinate without consensus. Traditionally, we needed consensus before coordination, right? So we needed parties to agree to standards, and this is why consensus, coordination, especially in slow-moving, complex industries, where you did not simply connect buyers and suppliers, but needed more complex interlocking activities to be coordinated. That required a lot of work on standards development. It required every player to agree on how they would share information, how they would open up their interfaces, what definitions they would agree with. All of that required consensus. Now, what we see with AI today is that you don't necessarily need that form of consensus before you can start driving coordination. Let me give you a very simple example. Let's say you're planning a trip, and you're today your customer journey as a traveler is very fragmented. You book your airlines in one's website, you book your hotel somewhere else, you book your tour activity somewhere else. Even your data is fragmented across different players. You dream about your travel on TikTok, research about it on TripAdvisor, and then on the ground you use Google Maps. So you're kind of, your travel itinerary is split across these various different places. And as a consumer, every traveler has a very different set of constraints within which they want to have a travel itinerary planned, and those constraints may even change from day to day based on what they want to do. And there's no single player or a single tool that can resolve all of this. And traditionally, if you had to resolve all of this, you would need all of these different tools and service providers to work together with consensus on certain standards. Even if you wanted reviews on 10 different websites to be deduplicated and brought together, and a single comprehensive view of what was necessary to you as a traveler to be provided, you needed a lot of this agreement to be in place. Today with AI, you can resolve a lot of this without necessarily driving that consensus in the first place. So I've been traveling, ever since the book launched over the last month and a half, even prior to the book launch. I've been traveling, and every day I use ChatGPT to think through the itinerary for the day. And ChatGPT is really bad at making maps, but that's not what you want to use it for. It's really good at taking 20 constraints on your part. You want to say, I want gelato exactly at 1 p.m., and I want to get to a museum that talks about this particular thing at 2 p.m. And you can give it 20 different constraints for every member of your family, bring it together, and it gives you an exact step-by-step itinerary. And you might have to validate it, but my point is that this whole coordination problem that in the past would be handled only by a gatekeeper like a travel agent working with a very limited set of options, because that's what they could store in their head. Now, AI can help you work through all of these unlimited options. At the back end, uh, it's possible today to create a single view of what a stay at a hotel may mean for a particular type of traveler by looking at information from across Reddit, TripAdvisor, many different places, which again in the past would have meant hours of research for that particular traveler. Irrespective of how good Google would be at indexing all of that information, it was still a lot of trawling through information. All of that can now be digested and brought together in a very consumable format. And these are just some of the coordination problems. Travel has many other coordination problems, but my point is that these were unsolved before AI, and all of this coordination without consensus starts coming together once you create gravity around solving this coordination problem. If you, as an AI travel itinerary planner, can get enough demand around your itinerary planning services, you can then enforce coordination with consensus, because once you've got demand in place by using coordination without consensus, you can then use that demand to negotiate standards and negotiate the format in which data can be shared with you and so on. So eventually, what coordination without consensus helps you do is it helps you solve the cold start problem of how do you get multiple players and multiple sources of information to work together in a complex industry. And eventually, starting from that point, you can organize the whole industry with consensus over time once you get that power to do that.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that the organization or the company that controls the interface to the consumer, if they're successful in organizing all the supply on the other side of what that consumer demands, what that consumer wants, that new company is in a position to start to decide who gets paid and how much they get paid and how much they get allocated. In my mind, this seems a little bit similar to the way, say, the Apple App Store works, which is a very controversial example because certainly everybody with an Apple iPhone uses it. Everybody has dozens of apps on their phone. They get value from it. We seem to be pretty content with it because it's easy to use and so forth. But in the developer community and in the e-commerce community, there's a great deal of dissent because companies feel like they're subject to Apple's ecosystem. It feels like a feudal system for them. They have no bargaining power. They have to agree to Apple's terms. Apple can be draconian. They take 30% of every transaction. And of course, there's been multiple lawsuits, some of which are continuing, so we won't know exactly how that's going to play out. But there actually have been allegations that Apple is a monopolist in this sense. And to the extent that you want to buy a paid app on your phone, it's kind of true as a consumer. It's very difficult to get anything else on your iPhone. Now, do you think that model or that example is an illustration of what is coming next with AI, or do you think that's not going to be a good example? Do you think that the AI reorganization of markets will look different than, say, the Apple App Store?
Yeah, that's a great question, because much like the travel example that we've just talked about, even in an industry like construction or logistics, these are industries where there are many different centers of power. There's not just a single choke point at the point where the consumer is being served. There are many different centers of power across the value chain. And those centers of power exist because of the nature of the activity. So, for example, in a construction project, designers hold a lot of power, the construction manager holds a lot of power. Now, in these kinds of scenarios, where I would say there are multiple different stakeholders who have different chokeholds, you're not necessarily creating land out of thin air the way Google did with the web, or Apple did with the mobile web. You are trying to reorganize power across these different kingdoms or fiefdoms across this entire landscape. So if I take the example, Autodesk is a very strong player in the design phase of construction. Procore is a very strong player in the construction phase of a building. But if an AI system comes up which can take outputs from design and link it better to how the field workers should use it in the construction phase, it can actually coordinate across these two different phases which have so far not been talking to each other, and um, reorganize them and gain power away from them in a new direction. Where I, what I'm trying to, where I'm trying to make a distinction in terms of how this is different from the Apple example is we're unlikely to see one single chokehold emerge in ecosystems like this, but we're very likely to see a fundamental restructure of power. And this is why, again, going back to your first question, it's not just a zero sum or a positive sum game. It's about the fact that the pie will grow, but it will be cut in a fundamentally new way, because new sets of power will come up because of the way this coordination is done. So just to summarize, it is similar to Apple in the sense that there will be concentration. It is dissimilar in the sense that I don't think it will be a one single source of concentration. It will be more of a multipolar world where there'll be a constant tug of war for power between these different players.
Great. Okay, we're going to take a little break right now. We'll be back in just a minute after this word from the people that sponsor the program. I'm Rob Tercek. This is The Futurist, and stay tuned for the second half when we'll talk a little bit more about the future. Welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm talking to Sangeet Paul Choudary, who is the author of a new book coming out called The Reshuffle. Now, I've been a fan of his work for many years, and I've read his other books. I'm in the middle right now of reading The Reshuffle, and from my viewpoint, this is a very helpful book because I'm interested in system change. When we talk about new technologies, we've often very much focus on a specific task, like how will that technology help me achieve X or Y, or some part of my work. But then we tend to lose sight of the larger picture, the larger impact. In the first half of this show, we've talked about how novel technologies have reshaped entire markets and, frankly, reshaped consumer behavior, and with it, entire industrial supply chains. So now I want to get a little further into this discussion. Sangeet, you've talked a lot about how people, when they think about artificial intelligence, they often frame it as if something's being taken away from them. They're against it because I'm going to lose my job, or it's going to automate my task, or in some way I'll lose something else. Certainly here in Los Angeles, where I live, there are a number of media companies who feel outraged about AI because they feel that artificial intelligence has been trained on their products, on their intellectual property, without permission, without consent, and without any compensation. Now, just before the break, we were talking about how AI can reorganize markets and in the process change the way the value is distributed. In other words, the pie may grow, but your slice of the pie might get smaller if you're a participant in an ecosystem. And if you're not the one orchestrating it, if you don't control the coordination layer, then you don't really have much say in how that pie is going to be sliced up in the future. Can you make a connection between the anxiety I just talked about, where people feel like they're losing something, or companies feel like their stuff is being used without their consent, and this notion then of coordination and the idea that someone can redefine how value is shared? Can you talk a little bit about that?
You're right. When we think about the impact of AI, we often, tend to think about it in this, in terms of AI either taking things away from us because of automation, or AI giving us superpowers because of augmentation. What we often miss in that framing is that the impact of AI does not play out only in terms of how it impacts the task, but the task itself has value because it's inside a larger system of work. It's inside a specific organization. That organization is competing with other organizations for the consumer's wallet, and so there's a larger system within which all of these tasks hold value. So a lot of our negative association with AI taking things away from us is born of this fallacy that tasks in themselves are how we create value, whereas the creation of value involves all of these other different things. I'll take a simple example over here. If you look at, you know, Amazon adopting robots in its warehouses, um, one way to think about it would be that these robots are either taking tasks away from the humans in the warehouses, or they are helping humans in the warehouses do things better. But actually, Amazon doesn't care about automation or augmentation. Amazon as a company cares about being the most competitive retailer. So the robots and the tasks they perform and the humans and the tasks they perform sit inside a larger logic of competition, which is based on Amazon's ability to deliver things within 2 days. So my point is that the value of the task and whether a robot should perform it or the human should perform it depends on how Amazon thinks its warehousing system should work and its fulfillment system should work to ensure that it still delivers in 2 days, 2 hours, 2 minutes. It keeps improving its ability to compete on that basis. So even when we think about AI impacting knowledge work more broadly, we're going to see a similar framing or a reframing of the system based on how the logic of competition itself changes. A simple way to think about it is, what's happening in fast fashion. So traditionally, the way fashion used to work was you had these creative designers who would think that machines would never take their job. They would fly over to Milan, to Tokyo, look at new fashion, and then come back and set up seasonal calendars and launch new fashion on that basis. One example of how this is played out, and it's a polarizing example, but one example is how Shein, the Chinese fast fashion company, has changed how fashion works. So traditionally, fashion used to work with fashion designers having a lot of say, with merchandising buyers having a lot of say in terms of what should be the next season's fashion. And then they would work on long timelines. They would move over, they would fly around the world looking for new trends. And what Shane does is it completely reverses this entire logic. It does not take away the designer's job. It's not AI taking away tasks in your job. It's AI rethinking or reimagining how the entire industry works from scratch and creating a fundamentally new architecture. So instead of, working on long cycles of sensing trends and thinking about what should be, the next season's outfits, Shane constantly learns from social media signals. It aggregates all of those signals to then determine what should be produced, what should be designed. It then breaks up that design job into discrete tasks that designers can perform, and then it uh, takes those designs and gives it out to its network of production factories, which allows it to deliver fast fashion at a rate that the traditional fashion industry would never have been able to do. So my point over there is that if you kept thinking about what AI would do to the designer's job, you would miss that AI is fundamentally reworking how fashion itself works. And that, I think, that's the real opportunity that we have with AI to reimagine how industries work fundamentally.
I think this is such an important point because so much of the discussion around AI focuses on labor, jobs, tasks. And what you're doing is raising the discussion up a layer or two to something that's a little bit more strategic because it's really, you're talking about a fundamental reorganization of an entire market. Um, let me see if I can link two thoughts here. The first one I want to talk about is how the value of an individual skill will collapse, and that happens with technology in general. As we automate it, AI is just a one step in a centuries long progression towards automating tasks. In the past, they were tasks that were done by dray animals and by human laborers and so forth. But over time, more and more information tasks are being automated. And the example you use in some of your writing is the idea that word processing made a big change to typists. There was a time when I was very young, there were still typists and typist pools in companies. And so organizations needed written information to be shared, and you'd send the notes over to the typist pool and they would type that up. And there were people who had this job. And so then the argument at the time was, well, you better learn how to use a word processor because the typist who knows how to use a word processor will still be employed. And the typist who can only use an IBM Selectric typewriter, that person's going to be out of date and they won't be able to find a job. But your view is different. Your view of this is quite different. You're saying, no, this is not the simplistic notion that a person armed with AI is going to take the job of someone who is not armed with AI. Like, that we hear that story quite a lot. Your job won't be taken by AI. It'll be taken by someone who knows how to use AI to do your job. You're saying is no, that's actually misleading, because what might end up happening is that the value of that task might simply be eliminated or greatly compressed. In other words, it doesn't matter who's doing the job. There might not be enough left in the ecosystem to pay that person. Did I get it right? I'm sure I missed a nuance there, but that's one of the takings I got from it. When we think about this at the task level, it's almost like an illusion. It directs us to things that really aren't going to be that helpful if we're thinking strategically.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And that's an example that I use extensively in my writing. And the reason I like it so much is that when we think about the impact of AI on work, uh, we sort of get into this trap of thinking that if AI does not eliminate a task, the job associated with that task will remain. And if AI eliminates the task, the job associated with that task is under threat. And typing is a great example because typing as a task never went away. It's still a
Yeah.
manual human task. The friction that typing used to resolve, or the friction that the typist job used to resolve, was the cost of editing. And what the word processor did was it eliminated the cost of editing. So the task of typing still remained. It is still a human task, but without the friction of editing, that task could now be performed by anybody in the system. So the
And in fact,
tasks
we all type, whether you're a software
exactly.
programmer or somebody using a smartphone, we're actually using written text communication constantly. So in a way, automation made it possible for anybody to become a typist, and that specialization disappeared. The specialization got automated in a way that made typing accessible to everyone. And now typing is just a part of everyone's job. So I see that very clearly. And is that your perspective? AI will do something similar with certain tasks. They'll simply be a function of someone's job in the future, but it might not be a whole job. That might just be a task that's incorporated into other people's responsibilities.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that that example actually teaches us is that even though we think of a teacher as somebody who teaches and a painter as somebody who paints and a typist as somebody who types, our jobs are not defined by tasks. They are defined by the constraint that they resolve in the workflow or in the organization, in the larger system. And so when we're thinking about the impact of AI, if we keep looking at tasks, we'll miss the impact of AI. What we should be looking at are what constraints emerge once AI comes in. What is the new form of constraint that comes in? A really simple example of this is the job of the anesthesiologist. You know, um, a lot of the things associated with administering anesthesia in critical procedures is automated. There are machines that can do it really well. But the anesthesiologist exists because there is risk associated with the procedure, and somebody has to bear that risk, and somebody has to be trained in order to bear that risk. So even though all the tasks get eliminated or automated or improved because of technology, the constraint of managing that risk does not go away. And I specifically talk about three types of constraints that make our jobs possible. You either have a constraint in the skill is very there. You have a constraint in whose head is on the line, so risk management, or you have a constraint in coordination. How do you ensure that all the broken parts of a workflow are brought together? And traditionally, our skills were the key constraint, and that's why we thought of skills and tasks as the way to think about our jobs. But with AI, the skill constraint gradually goes away, so we really need to think about what are the new constraints that emerge. So that's the key idea. I think the typist job really teaches us, because the typist example teaches us, because it was the constraint that made the typist job valuable, not the task.
Hmm. I think in organizations today, many big manufacturing companies have layers of personnel deep inside the company, whose job is to coordinate information. Previously, before the break, we talked about coordinating at the industry level or the market level. But if you think about a big organization, you've got certain people are designing the product, certain people are building or manufacturing the product, some are distributing it. And they all need to know the status of the product, some changes that have been updated or some other revision that's been made. Sometimes they need to see blueprints or future designs or something like that. And then they have to figure out how to do their piece of the work. In the middle of those companies, there's an entire clerical staff, product marketing managers, program managers, and so forth. These are people basically handle information. They're human information processors. They
Right.
take the information from one group and they reformat it into a way, or they track the information as it evolves and communicate it to another group in the organization. In my mind, this is an entire business function that's going to be automated very soon by artificial intelligence, because the AI as a co-pilot is going to see what the people at the end of the chain are doing. It will note the changes and it'll relay those in the right format to the other people in the organization who need it. And that might eliminate an entire layer of an organization. Does that make sense? Or am I fantasizing about this too much? Is my visualization of the future too fanciful?
No, I think it's a future that we're absolutely moving towards. I mean, the timeline on this is debatable, and depending on the nature of coordination involved, some of these things might happen sooner than others. But what's pretty clear in terms of how organizations work today, especially in the knowledge economy, is that there's a significant coordination tax that we pay, particularly in two forms. One is in the form of meetings and communication. If you think of meetings, it's people getting on the same page or people renting intellectual capacity from another team, which they don't have access to on a daily basis, right? And secondly, the second way the coordination tax comes through is in documentation. It's not just doing your task, but documenting how it's done so that it becomes repeatable, it becomes institutional knowledge. Both of these things are things that AI is already very good at doing, in terms of looking at what you're doing and creating documentation or creating a single view of institutional memory in a way, right? I mean, a
Hmm.
single view of what's happening where, why those decisions are being made, etc. Auditability. A lot of these things can be done using AI to create a single institutional memory across teams, and to also allow uh, team-based specializations to be accessible on demand instead of always having to jump onto a meeting, right? Um, Now, this is where the coordination tax gets resolved, because the more AI can solve this kind of coordination across teams within the organization, the more every individual team gets freed up to excel at what it already does. And there are certainly entire roles, entire functions, which only handle this messy coordination. Some of these roles may be completely eliminated. Some of them may, move away from a lot of the activities of coordination to a relatively smaller set of activities that still remain uncoordinated even with AI. But the key point is that organizations today are slow because of a lack of coordination, and AI, for the first time, is a technology that allows that to be solved for complex knowledge work in a way that previous technologies have not. And so I believe there's a very significant organizational shift that we're going to see in the coming years because of that.
Yeah, I think you're right. And for decades, companies have been trying to understand how to collect, how to extract and capture the knowledge in each individual employee's head. This is one of the problems when you're managing a knowledge-based company, is that the most important assets walk out the door every night and go home.
That's right.
And there's no real way for companies today to do that successfully. We do have an enormous amount of communication inside of companies on things like Slack or, GitHub or repositories or Google Docs, shared documents, and so forth. Yeah, so companies rely on an external tool to share and coordinate and get people to cooperate on making new information, but that's still not necessarily accessible. And you see this yourself as a manager in a company when you're bringing on somebody new to the company. You have to give them a bit of time just to navigate the vast amounts of information. That seems like a really, really easy opportunity to get some benefit from artificial intelligence. If a company could start to use an AI to organize all the knowledge in the company, and that could be gleaned from all the communications and emails and documents and so forth that have been put together, such that a new employee could quickly get access to what they need. They don't necessarily need a long learning cycle to do that. They just need to know where to find it when they need it. To me, that's as big of a change as the ability, say, on your smartphone to get information on demand, right? When we got the smartphone, the big shift with mobile apps, it's not just the ability to call someone like a telephone, but the ability to, wherever you are in whatever circumstances you are, instantly with just one tap on the smartphone, you'd be able to access information that's relevant. It might be a service, might be a product, might be an app, might be an answer, might be Wikipedia, whatever it might be. You got the right information at the right time at the instant you needed it. However, inside of companies today, this is not necessarily the case. And we go through an elaborate amount of effort to try to organize knowledge inside of a company. But what I'm taking from this conversation is that AI is going to make it accessible. It's going to unlock the value of all that worker knowledge, all the collective wisdom of the organization, and confer that knowledge on a single individual in the company. And in that way, it will be a superpower, but it'll be a superpower in the context of that company. That's a powerful change. May I ask you one other question? I want to ask you about a systems question. So, there's when we use the word GPT, we tend to think about the general pre-trained transformers that, of course, OpenAI has popularized, even though I think Google invented them. That's what we tend to think of when we hear those letters GPT. But there's another meaning for that phrase. That acronym can also mean general purpose technology. And a lot of people think that AI is a general purpose technology. And for people who are listening to the show right now, when we talk about a general purpose technology, we talk about a technology that is so widely relevant to so many different industries that it will have a transformative effect that might occur over decades, not years, decades of change as the entire industry will shift. And so some examples from the past are things like the introduction of the steam engine that enabled the first industrial revolution. Another is the putting that steam engine on a locomotive on a train track, which changed transformation, opened up national markets, and then electrification and the electrical motor, and then telecommunication, and more recently the internet and mobile. These are all examples of GPTs, not general pre-trained transformers, but general purpose technologies. People say that AI is a similar general purpose technology. And there's a danger there, which is simply that if you think of AI at the level of a task, of a single task, you're bound to miss that larger strategic systemic implication of the general purpose technology. And so the challenge for everybody who manages a business is to think of AI not just to automate tasks or automate individual workers out of their jobs or something like that, but rather to consider carefully how might this reorganize the entire industry. Much of what we talked about in this show has been in that direction. And that's one of the reasons I was so excited to read your book, because I've been questing for this notion. How will AI systemically transform industry, not an application solution or point solution, but a system solution? In the closing minutes of our show, can you share some thoughts about system transformation with AI?
You're absolutely right. I mean, when we think about AI, we actually miss what's really possible if we just think of it as a faster way to get today's tasks executed, or a better or cheaper way to get them done. Um, I think of the effects of AI playing out as a general purpose technology, uh, in three different ways, which some of which have played out with previous technologies, and one of which I believe is fairly unique in terms of the nature of AI. So when we think about how value is created, a very simple way to think about that is the distinction between product and process. So there's in any industry, there's a central product that's created, and there's a supporting process through which that product is created. A lot of technologies, think of electrification, for instance, transformed the nature of the process, but did not fundamentally transform the nature of the product in a very big way. Yes, with electrification, you had access, you could now create electrical devices, and you could now get significant power output in a much smaller form factor. But the primary impact on industry, for instance, was at the level of the process. When we think about, mm, AI, for instance, unlike electricity, which had this kind of impact on a narrow set of devices which could now be electrified, AI can act as an input into a product in pretty much every industry. And that's a very, is fundamentally different from AI simply improving the process through which a product is created. Because what we're saying is that literally every product out there today can be reimagined. Every output of a production process can be reimagined with the idea of this new form of input, which is intelligence, and intelligence that can constantly improve as we take it forward. When we think of AI as simply improving what we already do, or simply a way of executing things faster and better, when social networks first adopted AI, when you think of Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, YouTube, and some of these other companies, particularly Instagram and YouTube, when they first adopted AI, the nature of the social network did not change. They did not reimagine their fundamental product around the properties of AI. They essentially used AI to make their feed better, make their recommendations better, but the social network was structured around the idea of the social graph. So you needed to connect with other people in order for your in order for your feed to be valuable. When TikTok came into the scene, TikTok fundamentally changed the logic of social networking because it reimagined social networking around the capabilities of AI as an input. So, what TikTok essentially did was it allowed you to participate in a social network without having a social graph first. What that meant was that as a consumer, you did not have to go through the onerous task of importing all your friends together before you could see any value in your feed. And as a creator, you could get noticed even without any followers. And that's because instead of building a social graph, TikTok used the capabilities of AI to build what was more of a behavior graph. It inferred what kind of things you were interested in based on how you were, zooming into videos, stopping videos, playing videos, replaying videos. And on the basis of that, it inferred what you were interested in and connected you to the right content. And so it bootstrapped the social network by completely changing the logic of how social networks worked. So the point that I'm trying to make is that the systems level change that happens when you reimagine not just the supporting process, because very often when new technology comes in, and especially when we think about the idea of automation, we're thinking about a supporting process being changed, but your fundamental product can be re-engineered and reimagined from the ground up. When you do that, the basis of competition fundamentally changes as well, because before TikTok came onto the scene, the prevailing narrative or the prevailing wisdom was that social networks of the day were insurmountable because nobody else would be able to bootstrap the social graph that was needed to match the relevance and value that was available on Instagram and YouTube. If you did not have followers, why would you ever want to join a social network? And TikTok fundamentally completely changed that because it allowed your videos to be viewed without you having any followers, and through that you gained a following and so on. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that the real opportunity with AI is to reimagine not just the supporting process, it's to reimagine the product, it's to reimagine how competition works in your industry, and it's to essentially change the logic of the industry altogether. That might mean it changes the boundaries of which industry you play in, on what basis you compete. If you think of strategy, it's fundamentally two questions: where to play and how to win. And in the final chapter of my book, I essentially say that we're sort of entering this, over the past 10 to 15 years, we've sort of been entering this world where, because of structural uncertainty, where to play is no longer fixed. Your playing field constantly changes because industry boundaries are no longer fixed. Competitors come in from every random industry and enter your space, and how you win completely changes all the time as well because the rules of competition are no longer fixed. And with AI, I believe that we're going to see that happen in a much bigger way. My so the key point over here is that yes, it's a general purpose technology, and it's going to transform every aspect of economic activity, but not just in terms of supercharging things, not just in terms of improving your processes, making you more efficient, but fundamentally restructuring industries around the idea that you now can have intelligence as an input into the value chain, not just as a supporting technology. And I think that's what's really transformative about what AI can do.
Super. Um, well, gosh, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show. I have one last question for you, which is a simple question, but might be hard to answer. When we interview people on this show, sometimes we have people who are very pessimistic about the future and about artificial intelligence in particular. And other people, most futurists, tend to be very optimistic. How would you characterize yourself? Do you think you're optimistic about the changes you see, or do you feel pessimistic, or are you somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, I think I'm broadly optimistic about how the future is going to play out. I think there's a massive opportunity in terms of fundamentally using this new technology and its capabilities to reimagine businesses, to reimagine industries, to reimagine work. And while I don't necessarily play in the space of making predictions, the way I do think about the future is in terms of, what's the right lens with which we should be thinking about it, what's the wrong lens we should be taking off. And I believe that if people have the right lens, there's a massive opportunity here to really re-engineer things for everyone's good.
Glad to hear it. Folks, you've been listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek, the co host of the show. And my guest this week has been Sangeet Paul Choudary, who is the author of a new book called The Reshuffle. Sangeet, where can people find your book and your work?
Yeah, thanks, Robert. You can, if you're looking for the book, it's available on Amazon. Just search for Reshuffle. That's the new book. You can follow my newsletter on Substack. It's called platforms.substack.com. And I post there, almost every week, and that's the best way to stay updated with my work.
Great. Thank you very much for joining us this week. For the folks who are listening, we're always trying to find speakers who can help us reframe the way we think about the future. And I think Sangeet's a great example of that. So it's been a great pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for doing that. And I'll be back in a week with another guest who will help us think about the future. And until then, we'll see you in the future.